The Commission of Inquiry into the Usindiso Building fire begins the second phase of its investigations today, and we are expecting an update on proceedings there. Now, the investigation looks at the prevalence of hijacked buildings in Johannesburg. Newzroom Afrika's Ziniko Mhlaba is covering the story for us and joins us now live. Ziniko, very important second part and follow-up to these investigations, the issue of hijacked buildings in the Johannesburg CBD, both historic and deadly. Tell us what happens now, and maybe just bring our viewers up to speed on what the recommendations of the first part of the Commission's report work was.
Good morning, Iman. Yes, the Commission is now going to be focusing on the prevalence of hijacked buildings in the city of Johannesburg. Remember, when Premier of Gauteng, Banyaza Losofi, mandated the Commission to look into these two issues. The first one was what exactly had happened at the Usindiso Building. So the first part, which was mostly from January 2023 up until this year so far, was focusing on the issues of what actually led to that fire that took lives of over 70 people and at Usindiso Building. So the Commission, concluded the first part, and some of the recommendations or some of the blame mostly was, directed towards the municipality and its entities in terms of failing to probe and to monitor and to evaluate and ensure that its facilities, and in this case we're talking about the buildings themselves, which included the Usindiso Building, were kept, in a good conditions, and that they were secured so that, elements of hijacking, were not affecting its properties as the city of Johannesburg. So at the core, or the most affected entity that was pointed as a major failure, or as having failed to do its due diligence in terms of safeguarding its facilities, was the city of Johannesburg. However, there has not been a comprehensive report or statement or a sense of direction from the city of Johannesburg in terms of how it is going to fix the problems which were pointed out by the Kambembe Commission, which is led by the former, Justice of the Concord, CC Kambembe. So where we are right now, we are getting ourselves for the second part, or the second phase of the investigations of this commission, which is looking, or which will be looking at the prevalence of hijacked buildings. But there's so many things that will be involved in terms of that, because we're talking about, buildings in the city centre of Johannesburg. So we're not talking about maybe a few buildings in 2 or 3 streets. We're talking about buildings, in the CBD of Johannesburg. Remember that, during the proceedings of the first phase, the way people were already investigating and researching, and identifying possible buildings which will be of great interest to this commission as soon as it starts its second phase. And speaking to some organizations, the Inner City Federation, which is responsible, which has been very active in, championing the needs of residents or occupiers of those buildings in the city of Johannesburg, they told us towards the conclusion of the first phase, but saying that this is going to be the most challenging phase of the investigation of this commission, because from their own list, they've identified over 100 buildings which must be, investigated, which must be, looked at in terms of who owns them, who stays, and who's getting the rental fees from the occupiers of those buildings, and also how did those people get access and own those buildings, and were necessary, purchasing or leasing agreement, were they in place when those people, got hold of those buildings. So that's what this commission will have to do, and in doing that, the commission will have to physically go to these buildings so that they are able to physically see, the conditions of those buildings, especially looking at the basic services such as water, such as sanitation and electricity. Remember that the major issues that were pointed out as key contributors to the state of the Usindiso Building were the lack of those services, whether those services which were there, I'm talking about water in this case, were they paying any rates, and who are they paying that rates to? So we'll see now how prevalent those common challenges will be in these buildings. As I said, we're looking at about 100 buildings. buildings. So it's going to take a lot of time in terms of going to those buildings. But we're talking about buildings the Commission is not sure about in terms of safety. Will they be able to access those buildings in a safe manner? Are there any safe measures in place inside those buildings? But that will also then include law enforcement entities here in the city of Johannesburg, the Metro Police, emergency services, but also SAPS to accompany commissioners and investigators when they visit those sites. So that's going to be a problem. But what will be happening today, Iman, will be getting an update from the Commission itself in terms of, are they ready to start their work? What are their challenges? What are their major concerns? And do they have sufficient information about those buildings? Do they know which buildings exactly they will be targeting and why those buildings have been identified as of great interest? And you'll also now have to hear from the city of Johannesburg in terms of, has it handed over necessary information? I'm talking about the documents and ownership documents of those buildings to the Commission. So those are the issues we'll be hearing from the Commission today. But what I've heard from some activists who've been working with in terms of the proceedings of Commission, they're saying that there might be some challenges in terms of the Commission not being or not getting sufficient support. But in terms of what kind of support is the Commission worried about, we'll hear when the Commission starts the briefing today. So we're expecting the commissioners themselves to be here, but also affected stakeholders. I'm talking about activists, I'm talking about the city of Johannesburg and its entities as well, so that they gather here. The Commission will then table its challenges, will table its plan, will table its need to the relevant city, especially the city of Johannesburg, because at the end of the day, the city of Johannesburg has to support the Commission with necessary documentation, with necessary safety and security measures, and all the other information that is relevant as far as those buildings are concerned.
Ziniko, Mhlaba, thank you very much for that comprehensive wrap. It is such an important story to follow because it relates to, as we said in the beginning, a legacy of corruption, a legacy of neglect in the city. And also it's about the unmasking of that trail of corruption and neglect and leaving this legacy of justice and accountability in the city.